President Biden is taking executive action on gun control. He unveiled steps the administration will take immediately. But Biden says he wishes he could do even more. Biden says he and Vice President Harris will meet with both Republicans and Democrats to negotiate on the infrastructure package. But at the same time, he criticized Republicans for only wanting to stick to traditional infrastructure projects. And Biden is pushing for the adoption of a global minimum corporate tax rate. While some countries welcome the proposal, some are voicing concerns. Tune in to Deep Dive as we explore these topics and more. Hello and welcome. This is Deep Dive and I'm Tiffany Meier. Getting a gun could be getting harder. Biden's immediately taking 6 executive actions on gun control. Within the next 2 months, the Justice Department will issue a proposed set of rules to stop the increase in ghost guns or homemade guns and expand the National Firearms Act to short-barreled rifles. Meaning if someone buys a brace for a pistol, they must register them with the Secretary of the Treasury and pay a $200 fee. He's also directing the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives to release an annual report on firearms trafficking. Biden nominated gun control activist David Chipman to serve as director of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Biden pushed back on claims that his executive actions are an overreach. He called it bizarre to think his actions violate the Second Amendment, saying they are phony arguments, suggesting that these are Second Amendment rights at stake for what we're talking about. But no amendment to the Constitution is absolute. The Justice Department will also publish a model for red flag laws to encourage states to pass these laws. Red flag laws allow family members or police to petition for a court order that would temporarily take firearms away from people who may present a danger to themselves or others. Biden says he wants to see a national red flag law. He's also asking the Justice Department to issue an annual report on gun trafficking to help stop guns from reaching the hands of criminals. Biden used the rise in crime to advocate for stricter gun control laws, citing the gunman who killed 5 people in South Carolina, one of the 4 mass shootings in the past 3 weeks. Others were in Georgia, Colorado, and California. In 2005, Congress passed the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. That gave gun manufacturers a significant degree of immunity from being sued for money damages by victims or gun violence and their relatives. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki told reporters later that Biden is calling for lawmakers in Congress to reintroduce past bills that sought to repeal the Protection Act. A Pennsylvania appeals court last September ruled that the act was unconstitutional. And Biden also wants to make it possible for victims of gun violence to sue gun manufacturers. And some worry about how this would play out long term. And now there are mixed responses to Biden's proposed gun laws. Some say his actions infringe upon the Second Amendment. Others say they help reduce violence. President Biden claims his executive orders on guns won't infringe on the Second Amendment. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem thinks otherwise. She says taking away guns with red flag laws is an infringement. The Second Amendment states the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. According to the Library of Congress, the meaning of the sentence is not self-evident and has led to a lot of interpretations. But the Supreme Court hasn't made very many decisions on it. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, meanwhile, agrees with Biden's plans. She claims his actions will help save lives and reduce community violence. According to gunviolencearchive.org, over 11,000 people have died from some form of gun violence this year. But most of those were from suicides. 132 of those were from mass shootings. According to Giffords Law Center, gun homicides disproportionately affect Black Americans. Texas Governor Greg Abbott says Biden is threatening gun rights. He wants to make Texas a Second Amendment sanctuary state. Ohio State Representative Mike Lochick says Americans need to stand up for their rights now before it's too late. In February, he introduced the Second Amendment Safe Haven Act. It would designate Ohio as a Second Amendment protective state. The bill affirms that states have the right to defend liberties over the federal government. And some states have already taken action. Arizona governors signed legislation on April 6th that would prohibit police and sheriffs in the state from enforcing new federal gun laws that may violate the Constitution's Second Amendment. According to the text of the legislation, the state of Arizona and its political subdivisions are prohibited from utilizing any financial resources or state personnel to administer, cooperate with, or enforce any law, act, order, rule, treaty, or regulation of the federal government that is inconsistent with any law of the state regarding the regulation of firearms. Advocates say it would ensure that the rights of gun owners are protected from what they have described as potential overreach by the federal government, while critics say the law will undermine cooperation between Arizona law enforcement and federal officials. Gun control advocates such as Moms Demand Action and Everytown for Gun Safety sought to pressure Ducey into vetoing the measure. Moms Demand Action said it gathered more than 2,000 signatures in the state and presented them to the governor's office. And about a week ago, the Arkansas Senate voted to block federal law enforcement officials from enforcing certain gun laws and regulations. Arkansas state senators said of the passage of the bill, it is more important now than ever that we protect our state rights. State Senator Jim Hendren, meanwhile, said the bill would put Arkansas's federal funding at risk and would place an unnecessary hurdle between Arkansas law enforcement and federal agents. And amid all this, Americans are buying guns in record numbers. According to consultancy Small Arms Analytics and Forecasting, Americans bought about 2.2 million guns last month. That's the second largest March figure on record. Gun sales are generally driven by recreation and safety, but there are also concerns over increasing government measures to control guns, with some people even moving to more freedom-friendly states. While Biden's priorities are COVID-19 response and his infrastructure bill, gun control has reemerged as a policy focus. Now, speaking of infrastructure, President Biden says he and Vice President Harris will meet with both Republicans and Democrats to negotiate on the infrastructure package. But at the same time, Biden criticized Republicans for only wanting to stick to traditional infrastructure projects. Biden's massive infrastructure plan still seeing pushback among lawmakers. Biden seemingly addressed the criticism that the plan goes beyond infrastructure, saying to automatically say that the only thing is infrastructure is a highway, a bridge, or whatever, that's just not rational. He adds 200 years ago, trains weren't traditional infrastructure either, until America made a choice to lay down tracks across the country. According to him, infrastructure also includes everything from sewer facilities to water pipes. As for bipartisanship, he says a group of Republicans came to him with a $600 billion proposal to fund more targeted infrastructure projects, but they didn't move an inch to negotiate with him. Biden claims that his plan is a look-ahead approach, and it's what is needed to make America a world leader again. He says China and the rest of the world is racing ahead of us and the investments they have in the future. He went on to emphasize that he had tried to work with Republicans on the topic, but the Senate has the green light to go ahead, even without Republican votes. That would be through using a process called budget reconciliation, which is how they passed the $1.9 trillion COVID relief package, also without Republican votes. But it's not just Republicans who have oppositions to the bill. Some moderate Democrats are raising issues with the 28% corporate tax hike. Now, the Biden administration is signaling some room for discussion on the matter. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce previously called the proposal dangerously misguided. The National Association of Manufacturers says higher taxes will, quote, turn back the clock to the archaic tax policies that gave other countries an advantage over America. And Biden says he will push for the adoption of a global minimum corporate tax rate. That's to reduce opportunities for tax rate arbitrage by American corporations that reduce their U.S. tax burdens by shifting profits to low-rate tax havens. Biden said at the White House press briefing on Wednesday, "I've also proposed a global minimum tax, which is being proposed around the world for U.S. corporations, of 21%. Adding, it means that companies aren't going to be able to hide their income in places like the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and tax havens. This comes after Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen on Monday urged the adoption of such a tax, which would rely on negotiating a 21% global minimum corporate tax rate with major economies. Biden's 8-year infrastructure plan is to be fully paid for by tax increases on companies spread over 15 years. His proposal is to boost the federal corporate tax rate to 28% from 21%. The Biden administration is seeking international cooperation on the global corporate minimum tax rate. In an effort to at least partially offset any disadvantages that might arise from the administration's proposal to raise the U.S. corporate tax, the move is seen as a key to funding the Biden administration's $2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal. And now both France and Germany, which have relatively high corporate tax rates in the OECD, welcome the Biden administration's proposal, with France's finance minister saying, "We are delighted by the U.S. support for a minimum corporate tax." He goes on to note an agreement on international taxation is now within reach, adding, "We must seize this historic opportunity." And Germany's finance minister also welcomed the proposal, saying, "I am in high spirits that with this corporate taxation initiative, we'll manage to put an end to the worldwide race to the bottom in taxation." But Ireland voiced concerns about a global minimum tax. The country has chosen a low-tax model to attract foreign investment. The country has one of the lowest corporate tax rates in the OECD at 12.5%. And now, according to the Tax Foundation, increasing the corporate tax rate to 28% would raise the U.S. federal-state combined tax rate to 32.34%. This change will make the U.S. corporate tax rate the highest in the OECD, reducing U.S. competitiveness. The average corporate tax rate among the OECD countries, excluding the United States, is 23.4%. The Tax Foundation says in a report, contrary to the proposal's claims about a race to the bottom on corporate tax rates, reductions in corporate rates have plateaued for more than a decade. But what do you think? Let me know below. Thanks for tuning in to Deep Dive. I'm Tiffany Meier, and have a wonderful weekend.